Gave a commencement address yesterday at West Point. When there, talking to the cadets, he managed to fit in another entry into his resume, another entry into his Forrest Gump of a life story. He was there this time, although he's speaking at West Point. He was there. He was appointed to the Naval Academy. Listen.
Parenthetically, I was appointed by the fellow I ran against when I was 29 years old to the Naval Academy. I was one of 10. I wanted to play football. And by the day I was supposed to go down to interview, a classmate of mine who was also one of the 10 appointed, was chosen from. His name's Steve Dunning, came to pick me up. I found out 2 days earlier they had a quarterback named Roger Staubach and a halfback named Joe Bellino. I said, hell, I'm not going there. I went to Delaware.
It's a little difficult to hear, but this is another corn pop moment for us, where Joe Biden is now saying that he was appointed by a congressman to the West Point Academy, but, you know, football got in the way or something of that sort.
Well, he's saying he was appointed to the Naval Academy.
Naval Academy.
Then he found out that Roger Staubach was going to the Naval Academy, so he went to Delaware.
Yeah, but there's people have tried to go back. He said this story before, and they've tried to verify it. There's no evidence that this actually happened.
So I interpret this, I guess, a little bit more generously for the president, and I say that with our viewers knowing no one sits on this couch and gets more bothered and angry than I do when the president tries to say his son died in Iraq and the other things he says. I think what he's saying, which is a common process, representatives, senators have the opportunity to recommend for appointment someone from their district.
Yes.
The way I understand this story is, I believe it was his senator was interviewing 10 candidates to be appointed. But because he's 100 years old and doesn't really care about the truth, he says it as though 10 of them were appointed and he didn't go. And so I think it's a larger sign of being elderly and not with it than an outright lie. But at some point, does it really matter?
Well,
if you can't get the story straight.
The RNC seems to think it matters. That's the Republican National Committee, and this is what they said about it, Joey. They said Biden tells West Point graduates that he was, quote, appointed to the Naval Academy where he, quote, wanted to play football. He has repeated this lie many times before, and there is still no record of it ever having happened.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I guess my point is he sasays much more egregious lies when he talks about his son's death and connecting it to
fair
combat.
Point, Joey.
I think in this case, it's him literally misunderstanding how to use words, and I think that's even worse than lying.
Well, later on in the speech, Joe Biden had some more things to say, but then at the end of it, he said, "Hey, everybody, you got to clap." That's a laugh line. Listen.
America is the strongest when we lead not only by our example of our power, but by the power of our example. You can clap for that.
What's worse, that the cadets didn't clap, or that the cadets didn't clap to a line that I think in another generation might have been sort of, anyone would have clapped for that, but no one really feels that way about America that much anymore.
I don't know if they would have clapped at that line. I mean, I read it this morning.
I read it. I mean, I would have maybe. You know, we were setting an example in the world. Are we a good example anymore? I don't think a lot of us think that way.
I mean, it's a nice little play on words. I always wonder when you're sitting there in the crowd, it's like, is this when we clap? Why do we clap right now? That was well written.
It's hot.
Yeah, it's a Jeb Bush moment, you know, please clap. Asking for, you know, the exclamation point on your speech, but it's not ideal.
Well, he is the commander-in-chief, and you don't really feel a lot of enthusiasm there.
You sit there in a wool uniform in May, even in New York, it's still hot. They've been in that uniform for hours. They've stood at attention. They've marched. They're listening to him talk. And there's no inflection. He's just yelling a monotone speech. It's hard to know when to clap. It's easy to tune out.
Fair point.
They didn't clap because he didn't deliver a speech. He read a teleprompter in a loud voice, and those are two different things. When he does go off script, he says something about being appointed to West Point or the Naval Academy.
That's a good point about the tone.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of what I was saying. Like, how do you know when to clap? Because you can feel it. You know?
Yeah.
You can feel the ride. Nah, the ride was here, you know,
That's right.
but just louder.